Mr. Babich, we are having some temporary result, three-way mechanism, Russia, Iran, Turkey. How sustainable do you think this mechanism can be before the real talk in coming February? Briefly from you.
Well, of course, there will be a lot of difficulties ahead, but I think it is the best chance for Syria to stop the bloodshed, at least the best chance since the violence started in Syria in 2011. What is especially reassuring is that Turkey, which in the beginning of the civil war in Syria was adamantly against the Syrian government, they pushed for its removal. Now Turkey is also seeking a peaceful solution together with Iran and with Russia. And talking about Russia, I would remind you that despite all the reports, wrong reports in the Western press, Russia has always been pushing for a compromise.
Okay.
That's why we organized or participated in organizing these talks in Astana, which brought together for the first time the real fighters, the fighting opposition on the ground in Syria and the government of Syria.
Thank you for that brief analysis. Let's go to Mr. Serwer. Of course, none of these three parties have anything directly to do with the United States. And yet, Mr. Serwer, we're talking about this three-way mechanism at a critical time of your country. Donald Trump just becomes your president, who has had expressed his favorite attitude, at least, toward Russia. So how should we understand the current situation from your perspective?
I think whatever progress was made in Astana will be welcome in Washington, but I think Washington will also look to UN-sponsored talks in February for a broader political settlement. I don't see that on the horizon yet. It seems to me the Syrian government is trying to take advantage of its improved military situation to impose surrenders on the opposition, and the opposition is not prepared to surrender as yet, but is looking for some relief on the humanitarian side.
Ms. He, China, of course, is not necessarily directly involved in the three parties either, and yet China is a member of Permanent 5, UN Security Council. So from now until February, is it likely to be a smooth road ahead?
I don't think so. Because the Trump now is very busy about all of the things in the United States. He simply has no time to be shared with those Syria issue. But the one thing I have paid a great attention is, the Russia has sent invitation to the United States. They want to invite Americans representative to be part of this negotiation. So that means, so from the perspective of Russia, he want to use this negotiation talk as a kind of a token, to the President Trump. So they also want to be like a soft landing about Russia's role in whole of the Syria crisis, because before we all know Russia has becoming a direct partner in this crisis. They send the troops in, they have bombing, airstrike to the rebel forces. But now it seems, because Trump now is in the White House, right, and President Putin wants to be the partner, to be a good friend with President Trump. So how could he make that thing happening? So they have to make something changed in the Syria crisis.
Well, that is coming from the Russian possibly perspective, but what about the real issue, which is the peace in Syria? We talk about, Mr. Babich, the point particularly you mentioned. Rebel forces, for the very first time since 2011, met with the government side negotiators. Briefly only, but that is a huge difference already. So what is likely to be the next step? How is Russia likely to facilitate the two sides to be able to be together, particularly with Russia on the one side, Turkey on the other side?
Is it a question to me?
Yes, Mr. Babich. Go ahead.
Well, I think that it's... Yes. I think a lot will depend on the resolution, on the finalizing document that we are going to see in the next few days, maybe in the next few hours. according to the information that Russian media has been passing from Astana, all sides are expected to be united in their desire to fight the real terrorists, the Islamist radicals from the so-called Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra. So if we see that resolution with all the parties united against this common enemy, I think that will be a huge progress. And this is something that Russia has been pushing for. The next dream that Russia has is for the United States and for the European Union to join in the same vein, in the same fight against the Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra.
Right.
What prevents us, I think, from achieving that result is just jealousy. You know, the Syrian government wants, obviously, to have full power as it used to over the country. The rebels want their part of the pie. And I'm sorry, the reason why the United States only sent observers to Astana instead of participating directly using the Russian invitation, I think the reason is also jealousy. And as for Mr. Trump, I think that he's just starting to take the reins of power in the United States. We see the campaign unleashed against him in the United States. So I think Trump's attitude, if we manage to get him into that bandwagon, I think we should use the fact that he obviously dislikes the Islamic militants.
No.
He expressed this attitude of his in his statements on Israel and on the Arab-Israeli issues. So I think the unifying moment in all of this could be the common fight against the so-called Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra. We'll see the resolution.
It could
if
be.
It is against the Islamic State,
it could be,
then
but on the other hand,
we have a ground for optimism.
Just to give others some airtime as well. On the other hand, we do see some interesting movement coming from Russia this time. Mr. Serwer, I particularly want your analysis here. Unusually, I would say. Mr. Serwer, let me just go specifically. Very unusual practice from Russia this time. Criticize the Syrian government for what they call particularly concerned about sporadic violations of the truce by Syrian government forces. This is coming from Russia, which is being regarded as an ally of the Syrian government. What do you make of these kind of latest comments coming from Russia? Exactly what kind of role U.S. and Russia likely to play together in this regard? And what would that mean for the Syrian government right now?
The Russian criticism of the Syrian government will be very welcome in Washington. But the fact of the matter is that Russia has not been targeting the Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra. The figures, the statistics on this are widely available. It's the United States that has been targeting Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State. It's up to Russia to join that effort and to stop attacking the people who were in fact represented at Astana.
All right, wow, already a lot of different opinions going on over there. So it makes the real peace process extremely challenging. But we should mention, the international community as a whole has made efforts to end the Syria conflict since the year 2011. Take a look at some of these. The 3 rounds of conferences have been held in Geneva since the year 2012. Little was achieved, of course. From October to December in the year 2015, 20 countries took part in talks in Vienna. After the talks, the UN Security Council passed a resolution setting out a timetable for formal talks and a unity government. There were also 3 ceasefires in the year 2016, and only the current one is still mostly holding, even though we don't know how long it could last. So let me invite your wisdom here, Ms. He. What's the next stage? I mean, you analyzed earlier, Russia and United States particularly maybe at this time come a little bit closer in their positions, but the conflicts between the government and the rebels still continue. Meanwhile, Turkey and Iran, their role in this 3-way mechanism is arguably interesting. So who is likely to be the saver of this peace process in the long run, until at least, Ms. He, February?
Yeah, I think you cannot count on anyone can be the saver for this crisis. Of course, maybe we will say only the Syrian people will be the saver, but it's not so, realistic. So far we see now this time around this talk is just focused on the military issue, ceasefire, how to modify the ceasefire, even though it had been holding there and sometime from time to time has been broken as well. But the next time, I think the next month, the Geneva talk will focus on the political issue. So that's the thing those opposition parties want to. They want to talk about political transition, but that's not the thing the Assad government wants to talk. They just want to talk those rebel forces, you just lay down your arms and then I will give you amnesty. So that's a different track. So which means it's not easy to bring them together. So there's no saver can do that. Even Russia. Russia now, I don't think they focus on the fate of the Assad.
Okay.
He wants to use the whole this Syria crisis becoming a package. And then, he wants to change his job from a direct partner, now becoming neutral one, becoming a negotiator pusher. That's enough.
Let's see whether they could be able to do that. The crisis in Syria has drawn so much attention from major powers around the world, as our three analysts earlier predicted and also presented to us. Russia, Turkey, and Iran brokered the recent talks in Astana, with the U.S. and UN sitting only as observers. Despite the presence of regional heavyweights, nobody holding their breath for a Syria peace plan anytime soon. Take a look.
The Syrian government and rebel groups remain at odds over fundamental issues such as whether Syria's President Bashar Assad should stay in power or, as the rebels are demanding, step down. Turkey and Russia, each for their own reasons, both want to disentangle themselves from the fighting.
The peace talks have been broken off since April. I've explained the reasons before. Now the top priority is to resume the suspended talks and draw the rebels with arms and occupation of lands into dialogues.
Nobody can forcefully impose a peace plan on Syrian people who have been suffering severely. A viable and just solution is a peace plan that is accepted by Syrian people and their representatives.
Russia has been supporting Syrian government forces led by President Assad, while Turkey is behind anti-Assad rebels. Both of them would like to strengthen their presence without escalating the conflict in the Middle East. Iran, who has just joined the team, is keeping fingers crossed for a ceasefire to be reached through peace talks. The U.S. has shown strong interest in overthrowing the Assad government and democratizing the country. The Trump administration will make the situation even more complicated, as he has yet to spell out his Middle East policy.
All right. A lot of uncertainties. That's the only certainty of our world these days. Mr. Serwer, therefore, I want you to come in here. So many layers of the Syrian issue. Now we only add one more. That is what is going on with the Trump administration, its foreign policy toward Russia and also the Middle East. How much do you think this issue will be the focus of attention for the Trump administration coming new into the power with already a lot of internal chaos?
One thing we know for sure, it hasn't been the focus yet. Mr. Trump has made very clear his desire for an improved relationship with Russia. But what that means in Syria is not yet clear, I would say. He has also said he wants to see a safe zone in Syria. It's hard to see how that could be imposed without coming into conflict with Russia and with Iran, as well as with the Syrian government. So it's just very unclear at this point how Trump will deal with Syria, and frankly, it's somewhat low down on the list of priorities. I think there will be many other things he'll want to deal with: trade issues with Mexico and Canada, the renunciation of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There are lots of other things that he wants to do before he gets to Syria. I'll hope that maybe the new administration will have a clear position on Syria by the time of the talks in February.
Right. Mr. Babich, so interesting, because so-called checks and balances within the United States now has become the focus of attention. Mr. President Trump wants to have closer relations with Moscow, and yet probably some of the apparatus in the government, executive branch, judicial branch, and also the legislative branch have disagreements on that. So how much do you think Russia will be able to involve the United States on the Syria issue? Is this issue going to be a fundamental stepstone for the two countries to be getting ever closer? If Russia wants, what about the Syrians?
Well, yes. Well, as I said, there is one way to get Mr. Trump involved in the peace process in Syria. That is his dislike for the Islamist fundamentalists. But it is absolutely clear that the State Department and the apparatus in the United States, they will continue the same disastrous policy they had been leading under Obama, which led to a lot of suffering in Syria. And when Daniel, for example, just recently said that Russia did not strike the Islamic State while the United States struck the Islamic State, let me remind you that the Russian aviation appeared in Syria in September 2015. For 12 months before that, the United States had been bombing, as they said, bombing the Islamic State. And the Islamic State kept expanding during all that period. The Islamic State started to shrink only after the Russian planes appeared in Syria and started to strike them. And now we have even talks about possibly taking Raqqa,
so your point
the capital of the Islamic State. That had been out of the question before September 2015. Now I'm coming back to the issue of Mr. Trump. I think that I agree with Daniel. It's unpredictable what will happen in the United States in the next few months because the enemies of Mr. Trump are carrying the same technologies they used to topple President Yanukovych in Ukraine, President Shevardnadze in Georgia. They are now using the same technology against Trump in the United States.
Okay.
So it's unpredictable what will happen there in the next few months. But Mr. Obama's policy was a predictable disaster.
Okay.
So let's hope we'll have something new from Mr. Trump.
We know your
Mr.
point.
Obama was a disaster from the beginning.
Mr. Babich, we don't want to filibuster the whole conversation. We need to have our American guests to come in as well. Mr. Serwer, here's the thing. At this point, President Trump did talk about the fight against ISIS in his inauguration speech. He also talked about the possibility of further strengthening alliance, even though he didn't elaborate on what kinds of alliance it would be. So, given these interesting points he mentioned in the only formal talks he had recently, how much can we know about his future direction toward the issue of Syria, which is the biggest at this point conflict in the world?
We can expect him to continue the Obama administration policy of attacking the Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra wherever they find them. The fact that progress has been made in the last year is not due to Russian efforts at all, which have been focused almost entirely on the relatively moderate opposition that predominated in eastern Aleppo in particular, but also elsewhere in central and northern Syria. He will continue and maybe intensify the bombing of Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra, but beyond that, I think it's very difficult to predict what kinds of changes in American policy there might be on Syria. It just is premature to be able to tell for sure. Let's wait until he has a Secretary of State, he has a Director of the CIA, he has a Secretary of Defense. I think we have to wait for that and see.
We've already got the names of those 3 specific positions who are going to likely fulfill, and the Congress has already approved that. Ms. He, though, at this point, we understand several things: the conflict, the major power relations, the regional power relations, and also the unpredictability of the ISIS. With all of these ingredients being cooked all at the same time, here is the fundamental issue of the human disaster on the ground inside Syria. So eventually, what is likely to be the factor driving the resolve of this issue or the continuation of this conflict?
I think at the very beginning, the thing has been just happening between Syria government and the opposition party because for the governance issue. But gradually, and then the big powers has been involved and the regional power has been involved. So it's beyond the control of Syria government or opposition party. And then even the ISIL, the Islamic, the state, those fundamentalists also get involved in. So there are several different frontiers. So anti-terror and opposition party and the Syria government that fight. So there are many big powers fighting for the influence. But now to some different time and different those players play bigger role. So at the final time, I think big powers now play more role, like United States and Russia, and also the regional powers. Regional powers play the middle kind of role, like Saudi, like Iran, like Turkey. So these islands, I think Turkey, Iran, and Russia, I think it's temporary islands. So if President Trump, I think two things is very certain for him. One is he will join the Russia to fight ISIL together in the Middle East. Another thing is he will give less support to the opposition part of this Syria. So which means those opposition or rebel forces, they have no big backup. So that's why that's easier to push for some compromise between Russia, between US, even between rebel forces and the Syria government.
Right, but at this point, before we go, we understand that Russia is still a very big player until February, it seems. So, Mr. Babich, if I could beg you to be brief in your answer, is Russia going to have your way, free will almost, in the way of resolving this conflict? Briefly from you, sir.
Well, I think what Russia wants is a compromise with the Syrian government and the healthy opposition forces, dividing power in Syria, finding a new way. And I would remind you that when the UN talks started in Geneva, initially the West, the United States and the EU were against it. Russia has insisted on these talks in Geneva, which became the foundation for the peace talks in the future. And that foundation was laid in 2012. It presupposes political transition without pressure from abroad, with Syrians themselves deciding their future.
Okay, Mr. Serwer, final words from you as well. Mr. Serwer, final words from you as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Serwer, final words from you as well.
I see no hope of an end to the war as long as Bashar al-Assad is in power. But if Russia wants to try to negotiate a solution with him in power, because it can't have its way in Syria without him, let them try.